and my name's Pip Elliott, and I'm the General Manager of Wellington. And I'd just like to say how pleased we are to be in Wellington. We all wish we were Wellingtonians after reading the research. I am, so that's good. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Michele Levine, our CEO of Roy Morgan, who's going to take you through looking at the spotlight of Auckland versus Wellington and the rest of New Zealand. So, Michele?
If anyone can't see, can everyone hear for a start? Yeah. If anyone can't see, there's some seats down the front, and then we could make anyone who's late go up the back. So it's up to you, but there's spots down the front. So this is actually an opportunity for us to share with you what we've been finding out about New Zealand, because many of you would know that Roy Morgan Research has been surveying people in New Zealand for many, many years. So the data that we'll be presenting is really about our learnings about New Zealand, and we'll then draw some comparisons. So I suppose the first thing to say is that this is from our State of the Nation report, where we actually pull together the data about once a year and see what's really happening in New Zealand. One of the first things we do is we ask people in a really open-ended way, what are the most important issues facing the world, and then what are the most important issues facing New Zealand. And globally, you can see here the economic issues is just paramount in New Zealanders' thinking process at the moment. We can also start to see though that it's trending off, that it's still like the biggest issue, it's the lens through which New Zealanders are seeing the world, but it's no longer that huge gap between it and everything else. We can see terrorism starting to raise its head as an issue. And what we do find in this research is that people can't worry about everything all at once. You know, you can only kind of worry about something, and then something takes your mind off it and you lose track. So it is worth keeping an eye on what are the things that are worrying people. And when we look at the issues facing New Zealand, we're seeing a pretty similar trend. So for those of you who haven't followed this research before, around 2008, it was all about the environment. It was like that was the biggest issue in Australia and New Zealand. It was just the thing that was on our mind. It was really, really the most important thing. And then with the coming of the financial difficulties, the global financial crisis, and also with the naysayers about climate change, we actually saw the environment come off the boil. And you can see that the environment is now down at about only 5%, saying it's the biggest issue facing New Zealand, whereas things like social issues are around about 16%. And there are some differences across the different areas as well. We have consumer confidence at 119. So at 100, we have equal numbers of optimists and pessimists. People are very confident and very unconfident. But today it's at 119.2. Unemployment, according to the Roy Morgan data, is sitting at 9.7. The government stats will have it at about 6.9, I think it is. And we see the same disconnect in Australia between what we consider to be real unemployment, just people telling us that they're not employed and they're looking for work. We measure that as unemployment, rather than a tighter definition of people who've been actively engaged in seeking work in the previous week and absolutely available for work. So they didn't do even an hour's work in the previous week. So unemployment relatively high. And those we see as really key measures, key economic measures, even though there's lots and lots of other measures that people look at. And we have voting intention now sitting at the National Party at 44, which is down about 3 points on when the National Party came into government, Labor at 32. And government confidence, like consumer confidence, a measure of 100 is equal positive and negative. Government confidence is still on the positive side of things. So what about society? In general, the New Zealand population's growing. So it's around 4.5 billion now, and that's up about 15% in the last just over a decade. And one of the key things that this research, this won't be a surprise to you, but just to orientate you, Auckland, growth of Auckland has really been almost double that. So in Auckland, the growth is running at about 24% over that same time period. So almost double the growth of New Zealand as a whole, and more than double the growth of Wellington, although they're all growing. It's an ageing population, no surprises there. Most of the Western countries are in fact ageing. And we have an increasingly educated population. So, about a decade ago, 15% of people in New Zealand had a tertiary qualification. Now it's about 24%. So that makes a huge difference to the nation as a whole. And we'll see that in Wellington it's slightly higher than Auckland, which is higher than the rest of New Zealand. But this increase in education has huge implications for lots of things. The critical scrutiny that a nation puts its leaders under, the length of time kids are staying at school and therefore putting off getting married and moving out of home and being able to buy houses, the cost of education for parents. There are huge changes that go on when you have people staying in school a lot longer. And here we can see that boys and girls are kind of caught up. So pretty much these days, men and women are similarly educated. Home ownership. Now, the majority of New Zealanders own their own home. It's about 73%, or are paying it off. And even though I hear about this all the time in Australia, New Zealand's way ahead of Australia. In Australia, it's 60 odd percent own their own home. So we think we're really interested in home ownership. In New Zealand, it's a much stronger sort of thing. And we're seeing overall a gradual increase in home ownership or home ownership with a mortgage, and a slight decrease in percentage of people that are renting. And that's one of the differences that we'll see a little bit later on in terms of the difficulty or the greater degree of renting going on in Auckland. Country of birth. We're actually seeing increasing immigration that's diversifying New Zealand's population. So over the last decade or so, there's been a drop in the number or proportion of New Zealanders who are actually born in New Zealand. So it was 83.5, it's down to 78.8. Now that may not sound like a lot, 5 or 6 percentage points doesn't possibly sound like a lot. But this is not just sampling variation, this is really solid numbers. It's about 12,000 interviews every year. And I like to think about these kinds of trends like if you were to raise the temperature of the ocean by 5 degrees, it would matter. It would make a huge difference. So these sorts of trends, even 4 or 5 percentage points over time, really change the dynamic. They change the whole nature of the way things are. And the largest chunk of that growth has actually come from an Asian population. In Australia, we now have 10% of the population in Australia were born in Asia. And of course, there's a whole lot more who are the children of Asian-born people who were born in the country. So this looks like a thing that's set to increase as well. Increasingly, New Zealanders are migrating to Australia. So in the last year or so, it was about half of New Zealanders going to Australia. Now, Maori culture. This is an interesting chart. Maori culture being seen as an essential component of New Zealand society has been gradually increasing over time. It's now faltering a little bit, now falling down a little bit. You will probably know better than I do what that's all about. It's one of the things that from Australia we watch and think that it's done really well in this country, and we don't do nearly as good a job of embracing Aboriginal people as you folk do. Now, progressive attitudes. New Zealand has amazingly open-minded, progressive attitudes, more so than Australia, much more so than Australia. So today in New Zealand, 58%, a vast majority or a clear majority, believe homosexual couples should be allowed to adopt children. And there's a real open-mindedness in terms of computers and technology. 40% say that computers and technology give me control over my lives. These are two key dimensions about social progressiveness and open-mindedness, and they're still increasing. I was a little bit worried when the global financial crisis came because it looked as if the numbers were starting to falter, and people had often said to me, this is all just about economic well-being, and until the data comes in, it's sort of my view versus theirs. And when it faltered, I thought, wow, this is just going to move back to some sort of conservative view. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in this area. There is a little bit more of an economic conservatism, but not in this social progressiveness. Along with that open-minded, socially progressive, the flip side is obviously conservatism. And we're seeing these basic conservatism measures are decreasing. So the fundamental values of our society are under threat. That's a really conservative view. And even though it's sitting at 59%, it's higher in Australia, it's trending down. And religion being taught in schools, we've always viewed that as a measure of conservatism. It's interesting, Auckland is starting to increase. It's higher in terms of that religiosity, or the view that religion should be taught in schools. I think that may be an influx of people from other countries bringing religious views rather than a swing to conservatism in Auckland. But you know, that's what the data is showing. This issue, women should take care of running their homes and leave running the country to men. When I started in 1983 in Australia, that number was 18%. So it's trended down, and it's around this level in Australia, although it's picked up in Australia in the last little while. It's a bit of a worry. And people said that's the Julia Gillard factor, and I thought, no, I refuse to believe this, it can't be so. And so when we looked at the American data, two amazing things. Number one, pre the global financial crisis, about 14% of people in America said women should stay at home, leave running the country to men. After the financial crisis, it went to 21%. So, you know, what does that say? So many things. It's about conservatism. I think it's actually a very almost primitive fear that happens when the economy takes a dive. When there's serious unemployment, I think there's a reversal back to this kind of attitude. But anyway, well done. It's not happening here. I watched this one really closely. It's a good indication. Attraction to new ideas, and this is a really interesting chart. I said to you, and it's true, New Zealanders have very open-minded, socially progressive views. But when we ask you, as a nation, are you socially progressive, you kind of don't realise you are. You don't realise you are. So I just find this really amazing. I used to think this was an important question, your own view about things, but I suspect it's so entrenched in the culture that you are comparing, we're all comparing ourselves to where we are, but this one surprises me. You just don't get how open-minded you are. Attraction to new things and new ideas is a worry. This does seem to correlate with economic concerns. It's like when you're feeling financially good, you can afford to make mistakes. You can afford to go out and buy stuff and not worry if it doesn't work, you just try again, you do something new. When you're in a more economically concerned environment, trying and buying new things does tend to tank a bit. It's a slightly different dimension, if you like, than being socially open-minded. And that kind of decrease, I think, is a bit of a worry for the psyche of the nation. The data also shows that crime is less of a concern in New Zealand overall, and fewer people are worried about their own personal feelings of safety. A little bit of an increase in being security conscious, but overall I'd say those are figures that suggest there's not a major issue in terms of crime, safety and fear. Now here's interesting, and New Zealand's not alone in this. Every part of the Western world is increasingly wanting to be able to lose weight. The majority of people everywhere want to lose weight. Large numbers of people are constantly watching their weight. A low-fat diet is becoming a way of life for many people. They're thinking about the number of calories they eat. This is a national pastime. It's just become the way that New Zealanders think and act and live, and it's pretty much the same in Australia, and it's pretty much the same in America. And yet against that, you and we and the other lot just like us are not getting any thinner. So being overweight or obese is now a majority. So 63% of New Zealanders, according to their body mass index, are either overweight or obese. And it's obesity that's actually the pickup area that's driving that increase. So this is a bit of a concern. Alcohol consumption's decreasing. overall. Same things happening in Australia, and most of the kinds of alcohol are decreasing except cider. And what we're seeing is that wine consumption is actually being held up by Wellingtonians. Asking politely to drink wine. Cider's being held up by Aucklanders. So there you go. That's a bit of fun. Ciders are young, kind of, it's the youth that are picking that up, and they'll be also holding up the ready-to-drink kind of alcohol. Now, in relation to things like being overweight or that kind of area, there's a bit of a divide going on in terms of activities, leisure and activities. So on one hand, what we've got is we've got more people engaging in formal exercise. There's a move towards that formal, do-it-yourself in your own time when it suits you, and it's quite a, you're doing it for a reason, as opposed to there's a drop-off in anything that has to do with group sport. And it's not just group sport, it's kind of group things in general. So this is, I think, largely a function of technology and the way we view time these days. So people tend to be not going to things that are organised in advance. So there's this trend going on, and the other trend is the move towards being involved in technology and doing a whole lot more things online. So a lot of the normal things, entertaining friends and relatives at home, going to the cinema, trips on dates, the things that you would typically think of as activities are trending down, and more stuff is happening online, more socialising happening online. And these changes in activities, as well as of course our increasingly engagement with food, we're constantly thinking about food and fantastic food. There's food programs, food magazines are doing brilliantly. So that sort of national pastime of engaging, thinking about food and doing less of these sort of activities and being behind a computer are obviously not going to point us towards being thinner as a nation. So when it comes to technology, the big things, no surprises, the big things are obviously the internet has cut a swathe across a whole range of things. Mobile phones have taken over from fixed landlines, with the obvious implication that people talk to each other one-to-one, not one household to another household. You just ring the person anytime, anywhere. So that's a change in the way people are operating. And as technology evolves, we realise that there was sort of a model here, and it's a model of innovation, but it works for technology as well. So we realise that there are always going to be early adopters, about 17% in New Zealand classified as early adopters, through to what might be called the early majority. They'll follow on, they're not laggards, and then there's the sort of the ones who follow after that, and then there's the technophobes or real laggards. When we think of technology, there's two different ones that sit right out there. You've got the early adopters who are going to have the money, so they have to have the affluence to buy the gear to be early adopters, plus they have to have the mind to actually want to. That makes you an early adopter. Then you've got this digital life group, that sort of purpley coloured one, and that really is just the youngsters. They don't necessarily have the money to buy all the gear, but they'll try everything they can. So they will be into the sort of flippant new things, wanting a new one of these all the time, can't necessarily afford it, but definitely the mindset's there. And what we see is we see Wellington ahead. Wellington and Auckland both way ahead in terms of early adoption of technology, and Wellington ahead of Auckland. So this means that you can expect any form of new technology to take off faster here. In terms of media, probably no surprises here. We're seeing TV trending down as a medium, so now it's still ubiquitous. 90% of people watch TV, but it's down from about 97%, and they're watching less. The one that's really still increasing is internet, and the ones that are still relatively on the increase are things like pay TV, but that whole area is changing. When you think about newspapers, they're having to change. Newspapers are becoming online as well as hard copy. Every form of media is having to change in order to just survive in this new environment.